My perfectly predictable dog walk took a terrifying turn when a police officer pulled a gun on me. But when he turned off his body camera, he accidentally handed me the perfect weapon to dismantle his career. The evening air was cool, the kind of perfect early autumn night that makes you glad to be alive. The smell of cut grass and distant barbecue smoke hung in the air. My dog, Buster, a dopey golden retriever with more enthusiasm than sense, trotted happily ahead of me, his tail wagging a frantic rhythm against the quiet suburban street. This was our routine, our sacred end-of-day ritual. A little walk around the block, a chance to decompress from a day of staring at spreadsheets and organizational charts. It was boring. It was predictable. It was perfect. That perfection shattered in the space of a heartbeat. One moment, there was the gentle jingle of Buster's tags. The next, the scream of tires on asphalt. A police cruiser, a blur of white and blue, swung around the corner at a speed that was absolutely insane for this residential street and screeched to a halt, its headlights pinning us in their blinding glare. Buster yelped and cowered behind my legs, his happy trot turning into a terrified shiver. My own heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of confusion and adrenaline. Before I could even process what was happening, a car door flew open, and an officer was out, his weapon already drawn and leveled directly at my chest. He used the door as a partial shield, his body tense, his voice a raw bark that cut through the night. "Hands! Let me see your hands! Now!" My mind reeled. This had to be a mistake. A horrible, terrifying mistake. I wasn't a criminal. I was a 42-year-old consultant in a polo shirt and khakis, walking my goofy dog. My hands shot up instinctively, the leash dropping from my grasp. Okay, hands are up," I said, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. Buster, sensing my fear, let out a low, anxious whine. The officer's gun didn't waver. If anything, it seemed to get steadier, more menacing. "On your knees. Get on the ground, now." "Officer, what is this about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and even, the way you're supposed to. "Show you're not a threat. De-escalate. That's what they tell you." "Shut up and get on your knees," he screamed, his voice cracking with a mixture of aggression and, I thought, a hint of his own nervousness. He was young. Under the brim of his cap, his face was taut, his eyes wide. He looked like he was barely out of his 20s, playing a role he'd seen in movies. I slowly lowered myself to the pavement, the rough asphalt digging into my knees. The sudden, humiliating sting of it was nothing compared to the cold dread washing over me. Buster was whimpering beside me, nudging my hand with his wet nose as if to ask what was going on. I could see the glint of the streetlight on the polished steel of the officer's firearm. Every part of me was screaming. This isn't real. This can't be happening. "There was an armed robbery a few blocks over," the officer spat, taking a few cautious steps forward, his gun still trained on my sternum. "Suspect is a white male, dark shirt, dark pants, fled on foot. You fit the description." I glanced down at my own clothes, navy blue polo shirt, gray khakis. In the harsh glare of the headlights, I guess they could look dark. "Officer, my name is Mark Rivera. I live 2 streets over on Maple Drive. My wallet and ID are in my back pocket. I'm just walking my dog." I said, "Shut up," he yelled. "Don't you move a muscle." My training, the part of my brain that spends 40 hours a week analyzing protocols and identifying systemic failures, was fighting for control against the primal terror. I was observing everything. His stance was aggressive but unstable. His commands were contradictory. He wanted me on the ground but also wanted to see my hands. He hadn't called for backup, or if he had, it wasn't here yet. This was a solo act, a power trip. "Please, my dog is scared," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Buster was now trembling so hard I could feel it through the ground. The officer took another step forward. "I'll handle the dog if I have to. Now I want you to put your hands behind your back. Interlace your fingers. Do it slowly." I did as he said, my mind racing. My wife, Sarah, was probably wondering where I was. We were supposed to watch a movie. This simple walk had turned into a nightmare. What if he slipped? What if his finger tightened on the trigger by accident? These thoughts were a chaotic storm in my head. I was completely at his mercy, kneeling on the asphalt of my own quiet street. And that's when he did it. With his gun still pointed at me, he reached up with his free hand to his chest toward his body camera. I saw his thumb move. I heard a soft, almost imperceptible click. Then he spoke, and his voice was lower now, a conspiratorial, chilling tone that was 1,000 times more terrifying than his yelling. "Just so you know," he said, a smirk playing on his lips, "for your own safety, this camera isn't recording. Sometimes these things malfunction. Now let's talk about where you were 20 minutes ago." My blood ran cold. The fear was still there, a block of ice in my stomach, but something else crystallized alongside it. It was a feeling I knew well from my job, the cold, sharp, clarifying certainty of seeing a critical error, a fatal flaw in a system. He hadn't just made a mistake, he had made a choice. He had deliberately created a situation where it was his word against mine, with a gun in his hand to tip the scales. He thought he was seizing control, ensuring there would be no record of his conduct. He had no idea he hadn't just threatened a man walking his dog. He had just handed me a loaded weapon of my own, and it was infinitely more powerful than the one he was holding. The metallic taste of fear was still in my mouth, but now it was mixed with something else, a cold, hard resolve. This young officer, Kincaid he must be, based on the nameplate I could just make out, thought he was in control. He thought turning off his camera gave him all the power. He had no idea that in the world I operated in, a deliberate break in protocol, a willful creation of a blind spot, wasn't a show of power. It was an admission of liability. It was a signed confession of wrongdoing before anything had even happened. "Where was I 20 minutes ago?" I repeated, keeping my voice steady, my eyes fixed on his. "I was in my kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. My wife, Sarah, can confirm that. We live at 121 Maple Drive. It's a 5-minute walk from here." "I don't care about your wife," he snapped. But there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Doubt? Annoyance that I wasn't crumbling? The suspect ran this way. "You're here. It's simple." "Is it?" I asked, my tone still conversational, non-threatening. "Because your description was a white male in a dark shirt and dark pants. I'm wearing a navy polo and gray khakis. Not exactly a perfect match. And did the suspect have a 60-pound golden retriever with him? Because Buster here is pretty memorable." Buster whined again, as if on cue. The officer's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to this. He was used to fear, to compliance born of terror. He wasn't used to calm, logical pushback from a man on his knees with a gun in his face. My heart was still trying to escape my chest, but my mind was clicking along like an abacus. Assess the threat, analyze the variables, identify the exit strategy. Just then, a second pair of headlights washed over us. Another cruiser pulled up, this one slowing to a crawl instead of screaming to a halt. The door opened and a much older officer got out. He had sergeant's stripes on his sleeve and a weary, seen-it-all look on his face. He didn't draw his weapon. He let his gaze sweep over the scene, the rookie cop in a tense firing stance, me on my knees, a terrified dog shivering beside me. His eyes lingered on me for a moment, and I saw a flash of professional exhaustion. He'd seen this movie before. "Kincaid, what's going on here?" the sergeant asked, his voice a low rumble that carried authority without needing to be loud. "Sarge, I've got him," Kincaid said, his voice puffing with pride. "Armed robbery suspect. Matched the description. Fled this way." The sergeant walked closer, his eyes never leaving me. "He matched the description?" He looked at my polo shirt, my khakis, my boat shoes. He looked at Buster, who was now licking my hand obsessively. The bolo said a man in his early 20s wearing a black hoodie and black jeans. This guy's in his 40s and dressed for a Sunday barbecue. You see a weapon on him? "I haven't searched him yet, Sarge," Kincaid stammered, his confidence visibly deflating. The barrel of his gun dipped a fraction of an inch. "You can get up, sir," the sergeant said to me, his voice tired but respectful. I rose slowly, brushing the gravel from my knees. My legs felt weak. "Thank you, Sergeant," I said. "Your officer here was just explaining that his body camera malfunctioned. For everyone's protection, Sergeant, can you confirm that your camera is operational and recording?" It was a perfectly placed shot, The sergeant's eyes snapped to Kincaid, whose face went from pale to ghostly white. It was one thing to lie to a suspect. It was another thing entirely to have that lie exposed in front of your superior officer. The sergeant didn't even have to ask. He knew. Kincaid. My vehicle. Now, the sergeant ordered, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Kincaid, looking utterly defeated, finally lowered his weapon, holstered it, and slunk back to the sergeant's car without another word. The sergeant turned back to me. Sir, on behalf of the department, I am truly sorry for this. My officer is new. There's no excuse for this. I appreciate that, Sergeant, I said. My mind was already 5 steps ahead. The apology was a formality. The damage was done. The liability was established. I understand he has a job to do, but this was a significant departure from protocol. I'm sure you agree. I let the word protocol hang in the air. It was my world, and I knew he knew what it implied. Yes, sir, I do, he said, looking pained. Is there anything I can do? Can I give you a ride home? No, thank you. I live just around the corner, I said. But my wife is probably frantic. I was due back 15 minutes ago. Would you mind if I use my phone to call her? It's in my back right pocket. You can take it out for me, if that's more comfortable for you. It was the perfect, reasonable request. A man wanting to reassure his worried wife. He nodded, relieved to have a simple, concrete task to perform. Of course. He carefully reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone, handing it to me. I'll just need your name and address for the report, sir. Of course, I replied, taking the phone. My hands were shaking slightly now, the adrenaline finally catching up. The name is Mark Rivera. I unlocked the screen. My wife Sarah's picture was the background, but I didn't tap on her icon in my favorites. I scrolled down one contact to a name I hadn't had to call in over 3 years. I pressed the call button and lifted the phone to my ear. My eyes locked on the sergeant, who was pulling out his notepad. He looked up at me, a pen poised, waiting for my address. He saw the look on my face change. He saw the cold resolve settle back in. The phone rang once, twice, and then a familiar, gravelly voice answered, sounding like he'd just been woken up. This better be good, Mark. I took a deep breath, the cool night air feeling like life itself. Chief, I said, my voice as calm and clear as a bell. Sorry to call so late. My name is Mark Rivera. I'm the consultant who handled your department's procedural overhaul and liability assessment 3 years ago. And I'm standing on the corner of Elm and Oak, where one of your officers just held me at gunpoint after informing me his body camera was conveniently malfunctioning. Silence. The kind of profound, heavy silence that feels like it's sucking all the air out of the atmosphere. The sergeant, who had been poised with his pen ready to write, froze completely. His jaw went slack, and the color drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly under the yellow glow of the streetlight. His eyes, wide with a dawning horror, darted from my face to the phone pressed against my ear, as if he could physically see the chain of command I had just bypassed and the career-ending firestorm I had just ignited. On the other end of the line, Police Chief Williams, a man whose gruff voice I knew from 100 hours of contentious meetings and late-night conference calls, let out a long, weary sigh. It was the sound of a man watching a multi-million-dollar lawsuit materialize out of thin air on a Tuesday night. Rivera, he grumbled, the sleepiness gone from his voice, replaced by a razor-sharp edge. Give me a location again. And a name. Whose officer? Corner of Elm and Oak, I said, my gaze never leaving the petrified sergeant. The officer's name is Kincaid. The sergeant on the scene is... I paused, looking pointedly at the sergeant's nameplate. Sergeant Miller. Sergeant Miller flinched as if I'd struck him. He swallowed hard, the sound audible in the quiet street. He knew exactly who I was now. I wasn't just some random citizen. I was the architect of the very system his rookie had just tried to dismantle on a whim. I was the guy who wrote the protocols, who designed the de-escalation training Kincaid had clearly slept through, and most importantly, who calculated the precise financial cost of an officer turning off his body camera during a civilian interaction. I remembered the exact slide in my presentation. Deliberate deactivation, presumption of guilt and maximum liability. "Stay right there, Mark," Chief Williams ordered. "Don't you or those officers move a muscle. I'm on my way." The line went dead. I lowered the phone and offered it back to Sergeant Miller. "My address is 121 Maple Drive, Sergeant, for your report." He didn't take the phone. He just stared at me, his expression a miserable cocktail of anger, regret, and sheer terror. "You didn't have to do that," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You could have just filed a complaint." "A complaint?" I asked, a bit of the ice in my veins beginning to melt into hot anger. "Sergeant, with all due respect, your officer pointed a loaded gun at my chest because I was walking my dog while wearing a blue shirt. Then he informed me that he was intentionally creating a scenario with no official record, a situation where my life would depend entirely on his version of events. Filing a complaint is what you do when your garbage pickup is missed. This requires a bit more than a form filled out in triplicate. This requires a root and branch review." I knelt and clipped Buster's leash back onto his collar. My good boy was still trembling, but he leaned against me, seeking comfort. I stroked his head, my hand still not completely steady. The simple physical act of comforting my dog seemed to anchor me. The next 10 minutes were the most excruciatingly quiet of my life. Sergeant Miller stood frozen in place, a statue of regret. Officer Kincaid remained in the sergeant's cruiser, presumably getting the dressing down of a lifetime, or perhaps just stewing in the consequences of his own stupidity. I just stood there, holding my dog's leash, the ordinary man on the ordinary street corner, who had stumbled into an extraordinary mess. Then, in the distance, I heard a siren, but it wasn't the typical police wail. It was a more commanding, deeper tone. A black, unmarked SUV, the kind reserved for high-ranking officials, came tearing down the street and pulled up behind the other two cruisers. Chief Williams got out of the passenger side. He was a big man, built like a retired linebacker, and even in his rumpled suit, he radiated an aura of absolute authority. He wasn't just the chief, he was the king, and this was his kingdom in crisis. His eyes scanned the scene in an instant, taking in every detail. He saw me, standing calmly with my dog. He saw the two patrol cars. He saw Sergeant Miller, who now looked like he was about to be physically ill. The chief's gaze settled on me. "Rivera," he said, walking towards me, his hand extended. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Chief. Shaken up, but fine," I said, shaking his hand. My dog, on the other hand, might need therapy. A grim hint of a smile touched his lips. "He'll have to get in line behind Officer Kincaid." He turned to Miller. "Sergeant, get that rookie out of your car. Both of you, stand over there. Internal Affairs will be here in 5 minutes to take your statements, and your sidearms." The finality in his voice was like a guillotine. You could see the careers of 2 police officers ending right there on the pavement. Miller and a now ashen Kincaid did as they were told, moving to the side of the road like chastened schoolboys. The chief turned back to me. "Mark, I can't apologize enough. This is unacceptable. It's everything we worked to prevent." "I know," I said. "That's what's so terrifying. We put the systems in place, Chief. We wrote the playbook, and your officer decided to throw it in the trash on a dark street corner. What happens when the person he does this to isn't me? What happens when it's someone who doesn't have your personal cell number? Someone who panics, who runs?" He didn't have an answer. He just nodded, his face grim. "We're going to pull everything. Kincaid's training records, his arrest history, every complaint, founded or not. We're going to find out how this happened." "Good," I said. "That's a start." He sighed, running a hand over his face. "I assume you're going to sue the hell out of us." I thought about it for a moment. The money, the public apology, the easy path. But that wasn't what this was about. This wasn't about a payday. It was about that cold, chilling moment when Kincaid told me his camera was off. It was about the abuse of power that happens in the dark, unrecorded corners of the world. "No," I said, and the chief looked up, genuinely surprised. "I don't want to sue you. I want something else. I want Kincaid's complete, unredacted personnel file, and I want the files of every officer he trained with in his academy class." Chief Williams stared at me, his expression shifting from surprise to a deep, wary curiosity. A lawsuit, he understood. It was business. Lawyers would fight, a settlement would be reached, and the department would issue a press release about renewed commitments to training. It was a familiar dance. My request, however, was not on the program. "Their personnel files?" he asked slowly, the gears clearly turning in his head. "Mark, you know I can't just hand those over. There are union rules, privacy laws." "You can," I interrupted, my voice firm but quiet. "And you will, because the alternative is a lawsuit, not for damages but for discovery. A very public, very ugly process where my lawyers will subpoena those files anyway, along with every email you've sent for the last 6 months. And the press will have a field day with the story of the department's own liability consultant being held at gunpoint by a rogue cop. One path is quiet, surgical, and helps you fix a problem you clearly have. The other is a public spectacle that will gut your department's credibility for a decade. It's your choice, Chief." We stood there for a long moment, the silent negotiation hanging in the cool night air. Buster, finally calming down, rested his head on my foot. The chief knew I wasn't bluffing. I hadn't built my career on making empty threats. I built it on identifying systemic risks and proposing effective, often painful, solutions. He finally gave a short, sharp nod. "My office. Tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock, he said. "The files will be there." The next morning, I sat in a sterile conference room across from the chief, a stack of manila folders piled between us. For the next 10 hours, I read. I didn't look for a single bad apple. I was looking for a diseased orchard. I cross-referenced Kincaid's file with his academy classmates. I looked for patterns, excessive force complaints, even minor ones that were dismissed, citizen complaints about attitude, discrepancies in incident reports. And I found it. It wasn't just Kincaid. It was Kincaid and 4 other officers from his graduating class. All 5 had been trained by the same field training officer, a man named Sergeant Evans. In each of their files there was a subtle but undeniable pattern. A disproportionate number of their arrests involved vague charges like resisting without violence or disorderly conduct tacked onto minor infractions. More tellingly, in over a dozen documented incidents among the 5 of them, there were reports of body camera malfunctions or accidental deactivations during confrontational arrests. It was a signature, a taught technique for creating plausible deniability. Sergeant Evans wasn't just training officers. He was teaching them how to cheat the system I had helped build. He was teaching them how to hunt in the dark. When I was done, I pushed a single piece of paper across the table to Chief Williams. On it, I had written 6 names, Kincaid and his 4 classmates, and circled at the top, Sergeant Evans. "This isn't a rookie problem, Chief," I said. "It's a trainer problem. You have a sergeant who is actively teaching new officers how to circumvent oversight. Kincaid wasn't an anomaly. He was a symptom of a cancer you have in your FTO program." The chief looked at the list, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. He didn't question my findings. He knew my work. He knew I wouldn't make an accusation like that without irrefutable data to back it up. He picked up his desk phone. "Get me internal affairs," he barked into the receiver, "and get Sergeant Evans in my office. Now." In the end, it was a quiet cleansing. There were no splashy headlines, no massive public payouts. Sergeant Evans was allowed to resign, his career in law enforcement over. Stripped of their mentor and facing intense scrutiny from IA, Kincaid and 2 of the other officers resigned within the month. The other 2 were relegated to permanent desk duty. The entire field training officer program was suspended and overhauled, with a new curriculum designed around the principles of accountability and de-escalation designed, in fact by me, as part of my pro bono consultation. My wife, Sarah, was horrified when I told her the full story. She wanted me to sue. She wanted public vengeance. "They could have killed you, Mark," she'd said, her eyes filled with tears and anger. "I know," I told her, pulling her close, "but suing them punishes the city. It punishes the taxpayers. It doesn't fix the problem. This way we pulled the weed out by the root." A few weeks later, Buster and I were on our usual evening walk. The air was getting colder, a true sign of late autumn. As we rounded the corner of Elm and Oak, a patrol car slowed as it passed us. The officer behind the wheel, A woman I'd never seen before gave a small nod and a polite smile. I nodded back. There was no tension, no fear. It was just a citizen and a cop, sharing a quiet neighborhood street. As the cruiser drove on, I looked down at Buster, whose tail was wagging happily, his nose to the ground, blissfully unaware of the silent war that had been fought and won on this very spot. A single phone call hadn't just ended a confrontation. It had exposed a sickness and, in its own quiet way, had forced a cure. The system wasn't perfect, but for one night I had made it work the way it was supposed to. And as Buster and I continued our walk home, into the warm glow of our perfectly boring, perfectly predictable life, that felt like a victory.